Looks like some people have joined. So we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Austin Moser. I'm the Director of Development here at the James Madison Institute. Thanks for joining us today on our East Central Region Zoom call. Just the quick housekeeping items. If you could go ahead and mute yourself so we don't hear any background noise, that'd be very much appreciated. Close any extra browsers you may have that might help with the connectivity and sound. And then also at the bottom, later in the program, we're going to do some Q&A with our representatives that have joined us. So you got to go ahead and type those into the chat. We certainly appreciate you taking your time out of this morning and joining us. We certainly couldn't do it without your support. I already do see some familiar names and faces, so it's great for you to have us, or for you to join us. We'll go ahead and introduce our three guests today. We have Representative Tom Leek, who is representing Florida's 25th district, which includes Ormond Beach, Port Orange, and New Smyrna Beach. He currently serves as the chairman of the Public Integrity and Ethics Committee, as well as the House Leadership Team. In the wake of COVID-19, Representative Leek was asked by the governor to serve on the Reopen Florida Task Force to develop a plan for the reopening of our state after the pandemic. We also have Representative David Smith joining us today. He represents the 28th district, which covers most of Seminole County and includes Winter Spring, Oviedo, and parts of Castleberry, Longwood, and Sanford. He is a retired Marine Corps colonel, and for the last 10 years has worked in Central Florida's simulation and training industry, where he also owns a business consulting company. We also have Representative Plakon with us today. I think he hopped off, but he should be coming back on soon. Representative Plakon is from the 29th district, which is the western part of Seminole County. He is a businessman who has created and sold multiple companies and currently owns a commercial real estate firm and several other small businesses. We also have some JMI staff members that you'll see later on today. We have our Director of Communications, Logan Padgett, and our President and CEO, Dr. Bob McClure, joining us. So I'll turn it over to Dr. McClure now.
Thank you, Austin. Representatives Leek, Smith, and Plakon, thank you all for being here. These are historic times in a whole lot of different ways. 2020, as we all know, and we've all seen the funny memes on social media, just got crazier this past Friday with the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and what that means for the country. God's blessings on her family, of course, and all those who knew her well. She was a special person. But you add that into all that has taken place throughout 2020 and Florida, you add to it that Florida is probably the most important state in the country when it comes to policy and politics. Demographically, the entire country is right here. Rural, urban, military, retiree, millennial, you pick the demographic, and it's here in the state of Florida. Add to that, roughly 1,000 people are showing up in our state a day when you include births and deaths, and really it's kind of the epicenter of the future of the country. And these three gentlemen are playing an incredibly significant role in leading this state. If Florida were its own country, it would be the world's 17th largest economy, roughly around the size of the Netherlands. It's amazing, 22 million people in this state. And so we're really looking forward to having all three of these gentlemen talk about what they've seen in 2020, where we're heading as a state, and what they think the future will hold for the great state of Florida. We have looked at, we have kind of had many discussions about reopening schools, about the future of the state budget, about the state's economy, all of those kinds of things. And so we're really excited about the dynamic conversation we're going to have. To our listeners and to those who are watching via Zoom, I want to say thank you to you all. The James Madison Institute's work continues. We have never been more busy and more hard at work than we have been in 2020. We just simply are doing it differently. Like all of you, we're doing it differently as we reach out to people, as we continue to advance the principles and the policies that have made Florida the freest state in the country on a whole host of indices. And so our work continues. To our supporters and to our donors, thank you. Thank you for your generosity and your support. You're going to be hearing and seeing a lot from JMI in the next few weeks as we focus on policy leading up to the election. And to those of you who are not yet supporters and donors, but you are on the Zoom call, we'd love for you to join the team. It matters greatly. We're based in Tallahassee, but we are a statewide organization from the Keys up to Duval County, up to the Georgia line, across to the Alabama line, Perdido Key. And so, again, to our listeners and to those who are watching via Zoom, thank you again for being here with us. And I'd like to turn it over to Logan.
Thanks, Dr. McClure. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our moderated questions for Representative Leek and Representative Smith, and then in a few minutes we'll get to our Q&A for the audience. So I'm going to start off by just asking you both a question. If you think back, it may seem like ages ago. March certainly seems like such a long time ago. But 6 months ago, you were in Tallahassee voting on the budget. And since then, we've been in a period kind of unlike any other in Florida's history. And so from your vantage point as a legislator, what's been the biggest challenge for the Central Florida area, both related to health and the economic implications over the last 6 months? We'll start with Representative Leek, since I see you're unmuted, and then move to Representative Smith.
Sure. Obviously, COVID-19 has presented the biggest challenge. But that was kind of the impetus for what is the biggest impact and really the hardest and longest lasting thing we're going to have to deal with, which is how to recover from a government mandated shutdown of the economy. And I can tell you, and from what I'm seeing at this point in time, watching the budget reviews and the revenue projections, that the impact of even the limited shutdown that we had is going to be far reaching. So if you look at Florida's budget, it's please don't quote me on these numbers, but it's roughly 80, let's call it 82% is recurring funds. And those are things that we really can't touch, right? So you got, roughly $92 billion budget, 80% of it is recurring. You really can't touch this. Following the second quarter, the revenue expectations was a budgetary shortfall of somewhere in the neighborhood of $5+ billion. Well, if you do the math, that leaves about $32 to $33 billion from which you have to find that $5+ billion. Now, you cut out, let's say you eliminate all legislative projects. That's always a popular place to go. Typically, those are road projects, septic to sewer projects. So there's value in it, but let's eliminate them. That's $100 million. That didn't even get you close, right? Eliminate all new construction on universities. Now the annual cost is about $100 million. You're still not even close. So if we don't tackle the economy going forward, the impact on Florida's budget will be devastating. In Florida, we have to have, constitutionally, we have to have a balanced budget. So we can't spend more than we take in. So I think the biggest thing that we've learned since March, and really toward the tail end of March, we saw it coming, but since March is what the actual economic impact is going to be on everyday Floridians if we don't get this economy moving again.
That's a great answer. Rep. Smith, what's your take?
Well, certainly, I won't restate what Chair Leek said, because he really hit the nail on the head. Certainly, the impact of COVID on as a health crisis, and in Seminole County, we've had about 200 fatalities here in the county. Although the county has done a tremendous job in managing and isolating and following the rules, and mostly pretty good guidance out there to control it, the spread of COVID here in Seminole County. But it's unfortunate there's been loss of life, but not as bad as it could have been. And certainly as a state, the governor's done I think an outstanding job, and only history looking back will show how well he's done. But the cancer that is spreading outside of COVID is the impact on the business community. It was one thing. I've helped about 3,500. The last count we had was about 3,500. It's probably closer to 4,000 now. People that were when the Connect unemployment system crashed, that we were able to help get their benefits, and it was powerful to me when a lot of women, but men too, are calling me because I give out my home phone number. And I said, you need help with your unemployment, you call me at home. Here's my phone number. I do that via Facebook videos. And people call me and they're crying because they can't feed their children. And they're like, I've worked for 25 years in Florida and I've never needed unemployment. Now that I need it, I can't get it. And that's powerful when somebody's crying and they're depending on me to help them feed their children. So that certainly has motivated me, and we've been able to help quite a few people. But now, as early as just this morning, I've got business owners calling me, and they're not in tears yet, but they've got ongoing good businesses and provided jobs, and and now they're struggling, and it's contracts are being delayed, projects aren't going forward, and some of that's state spending, and some of that's just a freezing up of our economy where nobody wants to spend money because they don't know the potential impact going forward with how we're going to deal with COVID, or it's going to be a bounce back. But that's what I see. Our economy's becoming paralyzed. We've got to get people back to work more quickly. We've got to get back to whatever the new normal, I hate using that term, but to a more business-friendly environment, get people back to work, make people realize it's okay to travel if you take the appropriate, protections, and get the bars opened up, get our economy opened up, make it new normal to go back to work, not the old normal of wait for your unemployment check, wait for your stimulus check, betting on the federal government gives another stimulus check, those kind of things. We've got to get that out of the mindset of working Floridians, get them back on the job, and make people realize it's okay to come to Florida. It's okay to, enter into new agreements and contracts, but we've got to get Florida economy moving as quickly as we can up to full speed, whatever the new full speed is because of COVID restrictions.
Absolutely. I see Rep. Plakon has joined us while you were talking, Representative Smith. We've been talking a little bit about just the economic concerns related to COVID over the last 6 months. And so I'd like to stick on the topic of the budget. And Rep. Plakon, you've been through a number of them. While it's never an easy process, it certainly is a little bit more traditional than what we have been dealing with lately. What is your take on the upcoming budget process, kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly? What's that going to look like for the 2021 session this year? Oh, it looks like you're muted. There should be a button down at the bottom that just says unmute. If you click unmute, then we should be able to hear you.
Got it.
There we go.
Okay.
Now we can hear you.
Hello?
Yep,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Sorry about that. Well, it's an honor to be here today, and I've always looked forward to, over the years, working with you guys on policy, and been to your headquarters many times, so it's great to be able to share with you. I served during the Great Recession. I started 2009 session and served 2009 and 12. And I came from outside of government. I was just a business guy that decided to run, never was really around political stuff. So I didn't really understand the state budget as well as I certainly do now. But I remember the appropriations meetings. You could pretty much sum up as one agency head after the next came by. If you cut this, everyone's going to die, starting with the women and the children. Okay. And quite frankly, it was pretty scary. But we, unlike many other states, we've held the line on taxes, and we made some very difficult choices. But out of that we came roaring out of that Great Recession. And some of the states, Illinois comes to mind, and a few others that raised taxes, even to this day, are I call it a hangover from the decisions they made when things were tough. So from what I've read with the economists, they don't expect this to be as bad as the Great Recession. So I think that we're going to certainly be cutting, but we'll be okay. And I think some of that comes down to the fiscal responsibility of our legislature and our governor. We had, going into this pandemic, about $4 billion in reserves. You look at states like New York and some of the others, they have a real problem, and I'm not sure how they're going to solve. They're talking about federal bailouts and such. We don't do bailouts. We are responsible for our own government. During the last Great Recession, our bond rating was increased during that period from AAA to AAA stable, and now we're AAA with all three rating agencies. So I think it's really a reflection of our legislature and our last governor and this one, that when things were, cash was everywhere, like back before February, we were restrained in that spending. And just like a family, we put a rainy day fund away, and we'll be okay throughout this.
Great. Rep. Leek, Florida went from an unemployment rate of 2.8% and an economy, humming along to the current crisis. At the 50,000 foot level, I know we've mentioned getting folks back to work, opening up businesses. What else do we need to really be focusing on to get Florida back to prosperity?
Well, obviously, the quickest way through unemployment is to get people working. And so to the extent we still have limitations on what people can do and what employers can do on reopening, even to where we were, we need to take a very hard look at removing those. And, I thought the governor did an excellent job in his reopening. One of the things that I looked at that I think is still available to us is perhaps a more targeted approach. So as the state starts to approach what we'll call phase 3, as the state starts to approach that, there are certain places you can look, and there's no reason that they shouldn't advance to reopening. You look at some places in the Panhandle, in my area, you look at Flagler County, Volusia County, some of those areas have a very, very low incident rate. You can immediately reopen those folks and allow them to get back to work and allow them to start reemploying people. There may be areas of the state where that wouldn't be prudent to do, but there are areas in the state where it would be perfectly fine to do. One of the other things that we'll look at, really, it's hard to look at 2020 in any way that's positive, but the opportunities that maybe 2020 has presented to us is, a look afresh at what our regulations are and what the boundaries that we have to getting people to work. And, and Halsey Bashir has always been a great guy on deregulating, but I was talking to him recently, and I said, as you see the things that we've had to do in response to COVID, we've had to lift this regulation, we've had to lift this restriction to make sure that just because in that environment you couldn't have it, it wasn't tenable. So what of those things do you think that we can continue? And looking forward now, we know that, hey, without this regulation, the state of Florida didn't collapse. So maybe do we need that regulation or don't we? And I think that is one of the biggest areas of opportunity for us. I know Secretary Bashir is looking into it right now. And I know they're already identifying some of the changes that we made on a temporary basis that may be appropriate on a permanent basis. So lifting the limitations in a targeted way and removing the regulations that really haven't proven to be necessary, I think is the quickest way to get people back to work and get that unemployment rate down.
Good. Rep. Smith, your district is really in the heart of Florida's tourism economy. And I know it's taken a huge hit. How is that affecting your priorities going into the 2021 session?
Well, I tell you, it's absolutely correct. When the attraction started laying off people, and because Orlando's supply of affordable housing is horrendous. I mean, it's the worst in the nation. Many people that are in the tourism and attractions and SeaWorld, Universal, Legoland, Disney, and then all the other lower tiers, a lot of them live in my district, up in mostly in Oviedo area and somewhat in Winter Springs where I'm at. But it's a problem, and these aren't servers, or Disney cast members necessarily that are laid off. A lot of them are, the construction people that are building at Disney and Universal, and Disney laid off 55 nurses, skilled nurses that run, that sort of. So there's a whole host. When you think of the impact of tourism, don't think about somebody taking your ticket as you enter Universal or running the rides. It's much more broader, and they're much more higher paying jobs than, you know, whatever they're $15 an hour that the unions get them. So it is a widespread problem, and getting things back open is still critical to them. But tell you, the looming crisis that's also out there is because a lot of these folks that I found in the service industry in particular, if they don't earn, they don't eat. You know, I help a lot of people get their unemployment money, but also I've sent a lot of folks to food banks. People are behind in their rent. If this moratorium for evictions was not in place, we would flood immediately, overnight, flood every homeless shelter in the region and spill outside our region because people just can't pay the rent and they're living in their cars. I mean, right now we've got about 900 students in Seminole County schools that already live in their cars that deal with the homelessness problem that we have here in Central Florida. So it's the ancillary, it's the second and third level effects of COVID that I think run the greatest risk to the Florida economy right now. So getting, as Chair Leek talked about, getting people back to work. So that kind of solves our unemployment issue. But we've got some real brewing problems on the horizon. I mean, it really is. I look at this, it's like having multiple hurricanes coming at us. And we're just hoping they don't come, they don't hit us, that they skirt us. That's what I see. That's the threat to our economy right now. And I'm very concerned. It's going to take legislative action, no doubt about it. But and again, to just follow on very briefly that Rep. Plakon talked about, it is Florida's fiscal responsibility that gives us the ability to be in a position to make decisions where we can do what's right for a longer term, because we do have some rainy day funds and we do have a conscience when it comes to spending the taxpayers' money. So we're in a good position, but make no mistake, there's a clear and present danger to Florida's economy because of COVID. And it's not just the healthcare crisis, it's the impact on the economy. So we've got to roll up our sleeves and get a lot of work done. And maybe that's going to be in a special session in January. But the governor right now is taking action with withholds from agencies and doing some things that I think are prudent, but also have an impact on business in Florida. But exciting times to be in the legislature.
Certainly difficult issues to work through, and I know your constituents are lucky to have you, and we appreciate your leadership fighting for them. Rep. Plakon, I'd like to ask you, you're kind of the senior most member of this group. Throughout the legislative process, what have you learned most over your tenure?
Well, that's a great question. I had only been to Tallahassee once in my life before going to get sworn in, basically. So I came from a kind of different perspective. I wasn't involved in politics. You know, I learned, you know, some of the criticism, like you hear corruption in politicians and that. I have not found that to be true. The people that I serve with in both parties, I think genuinely want to do a good idea for their constituents. Of course, want to get reelected, but I think we serve with some really great people, you know, of both parties. So that's what impressed me. I found myself in a room with 119 other people that their 175,000 people had somehow chosen them. So it's, and another thing that struck me in getting started was, you know, again, coming from the outside, you see the news and all the antipathy and the division, but in the Florida House in particular, we all get along great. And I remember calling my late wife, Susie, probably a month into it, we're on the House floor. And I said, I don't want to sound corny, but this makes you really proud to be an American. For us to go in the chamber, debate the issues of the day, sometimes very passionately on both sides, and then go in the members' dining room and talk about each other's kids. So coming from the outside, that was a surprise to me. I was expecting it to be more like what you see in the national news, and it really hasn't been. I've not found that at all. Now, we're in election season right now. It's rough and tumble, and some of my same friends in the members' dining room are in charge of replacing me with somebody from the other party. But that's just the way it is, and it what makes us separates us from a lot of other countries around the world where they settle their differences on the streets and with violence. And I would chime in also, not directly related, but what the governor did yesterday, I think is a very good idea. Now, I've worked with JMI and some of the other groups on criminal justice reform for many years. And I say that's a signature issue of mine. But when you have lawlessness that's happening in some of these communities, I'm glad that the governor, and I saw incoming Senate President and Speaker Simpson and Sproul's there by his side. I think that going back to what you asked Representative Smith about tourism, I think he put a marker in the sand and said, you can come here, you will be safe. This is not Oregon, this is not Chicago, this is not New York City. If you're in Florida, we will protect your First Amendment rights. But if you mess with us, it's going to hurt. And so as much as we've done on criminal justice reform, there's a time and a place to get tough. And I think this is the time and the place. These people committing violence they're going after almost a sacred right, our ability to peaceful protest, and they're destroying it. So I think I read some criticism that we're infringing on people's First Amendment rights. I look at it opposite. We're protecting First Amendment rights that you can go and peaceably protest and not have to worry about violence happening around you. And in setting the environment to bring back tourism, we need to let it's okay for businesses to open up here and not be subjected to politicians in some of these communities that just look the other way, which I find absolutely reprehensible, and they should all quit, because our first job from the foundation of our republic is the government does a lot of things now, but what they're really supposed to do is just make sure for the common defense and to provide safety and security. So I was glad what the governor did yesterday, and it's interesting to see some of the comments from the other side of the aisle that are condemning it, which I don't even understand. It sounds like they're from another planet. Keeping us safe should be job one.
That's right.
Ask me how I really feel.
I think we know. I'd like to go through just a quick lightning round of a couple of fun questions, and then I'm going to pass it over to Dr. McClure for one last question before we go to the audience. We're in a time of college football. It's my favorite time of year, but it's definitely different. Who is going to win the college football championship? Whoever wants to throw it out.
Well, I have 6 kids, and we had one at the UCF Knight, a Florida Gator, an FSU Seminole, USF Bull. So I think they're all fine schools, and I'm for all of them.
Great. Rep Leek, you were saying something. You're muted, though.
That was a terrible answer, Scott. That was terrible. I mean, goodness.
That's a politician.
Yes, it was.
I was saying that we know it's not going to be FSU, unfortunately. I think this year it's going to be intriguing, but I think the winner of the Big Ten, which I predict would be Ohio State, the winner of the SEC, and I don't really have a prediction on that one yet, and then Clemson plus a 4th, and I think that 4th is going to give UCF a hell of a shot to get in. And so I'll be interested. I think at the end of the day, it is either Clemson or Ohio State, just because they have the most talent returning. But if I had to pick one, I'll go ahead and pick Ohio State.
All right. Rep Smith, I don't know if we'll move to another, stay on the same lines as football, but NFL. How many wins will Tom Brady have as a Buck?
Yeah, I think they'll do 10 wins.
Okay.
They'll be competitive for the playoffs because of the cast around them. But barring any injuries, I think the Bucks are looking at least 10 wins.
All right. Last question. When travel becomes more a safer thing, or we're able to go a little bit further than we can right now, where's the first place that you're going to travel to?
Who's that for?
Anyone.
Oh.
Rep Smith, where are you going to go?
I'm doing a pub crawl through Ireland as soon as the day after the election, if I can help it, you know.
All right. Rep Leek,
Well,
where are you going?
Yeah, to continue in that same vein, I think we've had 2 trips to Napa canceled, so I think we'll go to Napa.
Fun. Rep Plakon, where are you going to go?
My family used to vacation in Marsh Harbor, and last year I had several friends contact me, and my new wife Rachel and I headed up a relief operation. We got Allegiant Air to donate 3 airliners to fly to a remote strip in northern Eleuthera, and it was completely devastated. We took a flight into Marsh Harbor, so I'd like to go back there and go diving, and also see, you know, we have friends there to see how they're progressing at rebuilding it after about 75% of the buildings were gone. And what I hear, they're starting to come back. So I'd like to see there maybe this summer, go scuba diving and see them come back.
Good.
Logan, if I can recap, so the Colonel and I want to go drinking, and Scott wants to do good things for humanity.
It's because he's doing good things for humanity, we can go drinking.
There you go.
That's right.
That's right. Dr. McClure, why don't you go ahead and ask one last question, and then we'll move over. I see some audience Q&A that's coming in through the chat. Just a reminder, while Dr. McClure is asking his last question, if you do have a question for our reps today, go ahead and put it in the Q&A or the chat.
I have one question for each of you, and we'll start. It's the same question for all 3. We'll start with Rep Leek, and then I have a comment on what Representative Plakon said about 2008, because I think it's important to remember. The conversation, there's been a tremendous national conversation about the reopening of schools. Each of you represent very diverse districts, slices of counties here, there, and yonder. How has the reopening of schools gone in your particular district? Representative Leek, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Bumpy. I mean, it's bumpy. We're melding 2 different types of teaching styles, but I firmly believe that if we kept kids out of the brick and mortar schools, the people you hurt the most are the people in the lowest socioeconomic class. And what I saw a Gates Foundation report the other day about how COVID has forced so many, it was like 32, I think it was 32 million people across the world into extreme poverty. That's part of it. And if your kids can't go back to school, you know, people can't go back to work. And so it's been bumpy, but you would expect it to be bumpy because it's new. But I think it is absolutely necessary, and we'll work those kinks out.
Representative Smith.
Well, I wouldn't call Seminole County bumpy, but it's close. But the issues, the cleanliness and the cleaning process and those protocols, the masks and social distancing and all that aspect of getting people back into the brick and mortar classrooms has gone pretty well in Seminole County. The real issue that I've seen that's popped up is when parents had to choose, you know, brick and mortar, virtual, and then they make a choice, and then they were locked in, and then come to find out, and I've had to reach out to help a couple of constituents where they found out, you know, one child doesn't do well virtual, but oh, sorry, you've already chosen, you can't change again. So it's getting those kind of things worked out where you can make a change so that that child doesn't suffer. So those are the kind of the bumps we've had, but the actual classes and there's no teachers aren't refusing to teach and that kind of stuff. Everybody, it's been able to work it out. But again, Seminole County schools are a cut above, and that's a leadership issue. Superintendent Walt Griffin, who unfortunately is coming up on, he's just announced his retirement. The guy's really aces in my book. He does a great job in a difficult position. The school board, everybody works together. But what makes Seminole County, I think, special is the communication between the school board and the superintendent and parents, teachers, students. It's a very collaborative approach. And so, and I'm in that loop too, to some degree, just informational, but there's a very free-flowing amount of information. And that nobody likes surprises. Other than Christmas and birthdays, nobody likes surprises. So if you have your spigot of information turned wide open, I think that's really important, and that's been a key to during this time and previous time in Seminole County schools. That's why I think they're a cut above.
Representative Plakon, how has it gone in your district?
Well, we share the same, Representative Smith and I are both in the same school district, but I did talk to Dr. Griffin about a week ago, and he said it's going better than expected. They're having more of the kids are going to brick and mortar than they expected. But there's, I think there's something else that comes out of all this. This pandemic, of course, is changing culture in many ways that will stick. For example, I read that 10% of the airliners are no longer used because people continue to do Zoom calls as after this is all over. We've been trained to do it. But I think a big takeaway of what's happening with schools here, we have, I think it's 4 choices with brick and mortar being one. But I think it's going to revolutionize the school choice movement because parents are essentially have been forced to try virtual education and in some cases homeschool. So it's probably enlightened some parents. Do I want to look at other alternatives for my kids other than public school? Now we need to build and finance the finest public school system in the state or in the country, which we do, and we raise teacher pay, and that's all good. But I think that having raised 6 kids that were in public school, private school, homeschool, Christian school, Florida virtual school, depending on what we thought was best for that child at each time, I think a lot more parents are now going to be after this open to different ideas for what's best for their kids, other than just we've always gone to public school and keep doing it. And I think it's opened a lot of eyes.
Well said. Any problems with extra COVID outbreaks because of the reopening of schools from any of you all? Interesting. Yeah. That's what science shows. I'd like to turn it over to Austin, but as I do that, I'm also kind of one of the gray hairs here with Rep. Plakon, and I remember 2008, and I think it's critically important to understand that back in 2008, and if the numbers are correct, and 08 is worse being a relative term for small business owners, I fully understand that. Florida back in 08, was kind of the proverbial 3-legged stool, economically speaking, of construction, tourism, and agriculture. It's much more diversified now. But in 08, we had a choice to make. And I want to echo what Representative Plakon said. Taxes were not raised. The state lived within its means and, in fact, cut the state budget. In Florida, people may not remember, in 08 was hurt worse economically than perhaps any other state in the country because of that proverbial 3-legged stool. And yet, because of the leadership in the legislature and then Governor Scott in his first year, which seems like a million years ago, Florida recovered faster and much more quickly than any other state in the country, and has continued from an economic standpoint, proceeded to do so again. And so with that kind of leadership, we have a saying here at JMI, freedom works every time it's tried. And so when you keep government out of the way and allow government to simply be the referee, call balls and strikes, but stay out of the way and allow the free market to work, people can get back to work and lives can be improved. And so I think 08 is a cautionary tale for what should be happening in 2020. And I believe all 3 of these gentlemen on this call today share those values and those principles. And I think our governor does too. So we look forward to seeing what they're going to be doing in 2020. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Austin and we will get some questions from the audience.
Hey, Austin, you're still muted.
Helpful if I took myself off mute. Sorry about that. Representative Leek, this one goes out to you. Your colleague, Representative Smith, has recently signed a pledge not to raise taxes if reelected. Do you plan on signing that same pledge as well?
That's a great question. I do not raise taxes. In fact, I'm the one who shepherded through Amendment 5 for our Constitution that said you could not raise any taxes or fees without a three-fifths vote in both chambers. But as a matter of rule, I don't fill out questionnaires or sign packs. I've got a record now. It's a strong record, and in fact, I think of everyone in the House. I'm the only one who carried that bill, and we were able to get that passed on the Constitution.
Good deal. We had one come through the chat from Andre O'Sullivan, so we'll ask this one to Representative Plakon. Andre, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Hey, sorry, I was just unmuting. Sure thing. So this relates earlier to the conversation about COVID and kickstarting our economy here in Florida, which I was really glad to hear you all talk about. So from my understanding, a lot of the policies that are harmful to businesses are actually set by the local government, right? So things like ordinances on what businesses can be open. Oftentimes there's even kind of legal questioning about like the soundness of those policies. I'm curious what the concrete steps are that you think the state can take either on the legislative level or the executive to help kickstart a recovery. And unfortunately, a lot of things with COVID have been a little politicized. Do you think in this case there's bipartisan support for such ideas? Because, everyone benefits from a strong economy.
Well, thank you. As Florida state representatives, we have, I think, a responsibility to create an environment in our state that is friendly to businesses. That being said, we have 411 cities, some of which have elected officials that have far different ideas. I'll call it, in some cases, the far left, that, perhaps like some of the mayors that we read about in the national news. So some of the ordinances that get passed over the years, some have been unconstitutional. And, I think all of us on this call were for home rule, but there's limits to it. And some of these cities and in some cases counties push the limits of even what's constitutional. So our responsibility is to create an overall environment that businesses will find attractive. We've had 4 years ago, we passed New York in population to become the third largest state because people like what they see here. It's a great place to start a business, to raise a family, water on three sides. And the New York budget is almost double ours. So I think that we have to focus on an environment, and to the extent, to your question of if cities have excessive regulations, we need to look at in some cases, preempting them if you have a large number of cities. I was years ago involved in, Bob would remember this, the storefront casinos, internet cafes. So I filed a bill in 2011. It was $1 billion industry with 1,000 locations. And it was like strip mall casinos, really tacky places that were taking advantage of the elderly. So the first year, the League of Cities supported it. And then in year two, they came to me, and this group was donating millions of dollars to city governments that, no, we'd like to regulate. In other words, we want to have these cheesy casinos in. We essentially did a preemption that had the effect of shutting these down. And I remember there was the San Francisco Chronicle wrote an article making fun of us, our inability to control this. And so the state stepped in and shut them all down. And the cities were not able to collect taxes from them. So that's an example of where they take it too far and the state had to step in. And some of the cities forget that they are all subdivisions of the state government. And we eliminated the city of Weeki-Wachee this year. The mermaids are fine, but they were underwater just like the mermaids financially. And I chaired the local affairs committee a couple of years ago, and we authorized 2 new cities. So the way our Constitution is set up, they're subdivisions of government, and we have the responsibility to create a sort of an even playing across the state while giving them certain autonomy for the unique nature of each of the communities.
That sounds great. Thank you. This one goes out to Representative Smith. Charged with electing the next crop of public officials, citizens of Florida will also be asked to pass judgment on 6 amendments. There's an initiative on the ballot this November that will raise the minimum wage to $15 by 2026. How will that affect businesses and people's ability to find work after COVID?
Well, it's going to have a very adverse impact. But I tell you, first and foremost, the minimum wage has no place being in our state constitution. I mean, it's the wrong place. It shouldn't even be on the ballot, in my opinion. But I tell you, talk to any business owner, and it doesn't have to be in the hospitality or, even lower wage. That type of minimum wage should be devastating. And you really, all you have to do is look at other cities, states that have tried to do those types of things. And when you interfere with the free market, bad things happen. This is not regulating for safety and government involvement. This is a fundamental injection into the free market economy that has devastating impacts. And just, you can, look at the Northwest as in particular, whether it's Portland or Washington and others that have tried to do this, and it would have a significant, long-lasting impact. We couldn't, because again, if you do it in the state constitution, you got to take it out of the state constitution. And that takes time. And the time that were to pass, the damage it would do would be have a not lasting, but a lingering impact at a time we're trying to get this economy restarted. And I think that's the logic that we'll use to have Florida voters reject that ballot amendment in November.
Sounds great. And just to let everyone know, JMI did release a amendment guide, gives the pros and cons for everybody, and we'll put the link in the chat so you can check that out for yourself. So this one goes out to Rep Leek, and we'll end on this one. This one comes from Neil. Does Florida have a chief technology officer? And if so, or if not, why not?
Actually, Florida does, as of about 30 days ago, and it's our good friend Jamie Grant. So, and I think they call him, it's either CTO or CIO, I'm not sure which, but they do. And so I think that probably answers the question. Yes.
Yeah. Sounds good. So I think that wraps up for all the questions we have. We're almost out of time. Just want to thank everybody for joining us today and taking a little time out of your morning. Feel free to reach out to any of us at JMI, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all very much.